I woke up one day in a strange place, somewhere most people wouldn't think to go. I found myself in a town that seemed just like any other. Decent size, plenty of jobs, and not much crime. The air outside was temperate and calm. It wasn't that humid, but it wasn't quite dry either. There were lots of places to go, things to do, people of all ages who were kind and humble. It was surrounded by such incredible natural beauty, as if it existed simultaneously in the middle of nowhere and everywhere. If you didn't know any better, you might be tempted to call it paradise, but don't be deceived. There's a reason why most people don't come here, for this place carries with it a terrible curse. In the 1830s, the Muskogee Indians were expelled from their ancestral lands in what is now northern Alabama. But where would they go? As it turned out, the lawmakers who sealed their fate didn't know either. Thus far, the recently purchased Louisiana Territory was scarcely explored. The few who had surveyed the lands described a vast prairie lacking any valuable resources. Far enough west, the forest disappeared and the soil became infertile for agriculture. Naturally, when the government learned of this, the region was earmarked as the ideal destination for America's native people. Under the veneer of a humanitarian exchange of territory, American lawmakers concocted perhaps the most ruthless land grab in the history of the nation, ignoring whatever treaties or federal protections that were supposedly in place at the time. The government effectively seized millions of acres through a vicious campaign of threats, lies, and coercion. The extorted lands would be used almost exclusively as a means of expanding slavery, while its original inhabitants were exiled into what most understood as a barren wasteland, someplace no tax-paying American would ever have any reason to go. The Creeks, along with a dozen or so other indigenous tribes, would be forcibly marched through more than 500 miles of hostile wilderness to what some imagined to be the edge of the world. Thousands died along the way. Many others starved to death once they got there. Those who survived had to gradually adapt to the stark change in scenery. Nearly everything about this place was different from where they'd come, but one thing remained the same: the strikingly red soil, their final tether to the land they once called home. The Chickasaw people would name the new territory after the Red Earth, christening the place we now know as Oklahoma. The state can best be described as a land of extremes, a term that applies to its history, geography, and especially climate. It has played host to some of the most bizarre and unnerving events that America has ever witnessed, and yet the rest of the country has a hard time remembering that it exists. In today's culture, it is known unaffectionately as one of the flyover states, the part of the country considered so boring and uneventful that there's no point in visiting. Perhaps it's fitting that most Americans prefer to ignore Oklahoma, because this place was at the center of one of the most shameful chapters in our nation's history. Through a childish interpretation, the state of Oklahoma sort of looks like a gun pointing westward. This resemblance is actually quite fitting when you discover its dark origins. Most Americans know about the Trail of Tears, but it would be far from the last injustice to befall the people of the Indian Territory. By the end of the 1830s, the displaced tribes had finally settled into what was supposed to be their last compromise. It took just 10 years before their sovereignty was under threat once again. In 1848, gold was discovered in California, and the complexion of America was forever altered. Soon after, railroads were running from coast to coast. With the railroads came a new wave of intruders, and with intruders came the same old story: plunder, exploitation, and stupendous greed. Before long, oil was discovered beneath the Indian Territory, and all of a sudden, the natives' land was coveted once again. The news spelled doom for not just the displaced tribes, but the Plains Indians as well. The oldest inhabitants of Oklahoma were some of the last nomadic people in the world, and relied on the vast landscape for survival. Their fate would be sealed by one of the most disturbing effects of westward expansion. At the beginning of the 19th century, as many as 60 million bison dotted the Great Plains. However, once bison hide was discovered to possess valuable industrial properties, hunters began to slaughter them with unprecedented efficiency. The landscape was left littered with millions of skinned, rotting carcasses as far as the eye could see. The stench must have been unimaginable. Despite hearing concerns from worried conservationists, the federal government allowed the biblical massacre to run its course, knowing full well that the end of the bison would bring about the end of native prosperity. By the end of the 1880s, the American bison was all but extinct, and the starving Plains Indians surrendered the last of their freedoms. Corralled into pitiful reservations, they had met the fate that would soon befall the rest of America's original people. The final nail in the coffin would come from the Dawes Act of 1887, which dissolved tribal leadership and effectively ended Indian sovereignty within U.S. borders. Children were forcibly sent away to re-education facilities where they were to be stripped of their cultural identity. Communal ownership of land was replaced with a privatized system intended to further seize what little territory they had left. And with that, one of America's greatest injustices had come to a close. But the story of Oklahoma was only just beginning. It's April 22nd, 1889, and approximately 50,000 people have crowded in behind a thin line in the dirt. At the heart of the Oklahoma Territory, 2 million acres of land have conveniently opened up for settlement, and the federal government is giving it away for free. First come, first serve. At the stroke of noon, the horde was unleashed into the unassigned lands, desperately chasing their generational dreams. By the end of the day, all 2 million acres had been gobbled up, leaving many hopeful homesteaders empty-handed. Much to their dismay, many of the tracts had been claimed impossibly fast. It turned out that plenty of the new landowners had started the race a little early, sneaking into the territory hours or even days before they were supposed to. Those who jumped the gun were called Sooners, a moniker that would go on to define all Oklahomans. It's somewhat fitting that the state's most iconic term of endearment is literally named after people who cheated their way to glory. If this tale has taught us anything thus far, it's that so-called laws and rules and treaties are quite malleable. In fact, we might as well think of them as a bunch of made-up imaginary crap based on nothing that can be disregarded on a whim with no consequences whatsoever. Man-made laws are, quite simply, designed to be broken. The same can't be said, however, for the laws of nature, and the Sooners were about to learn a harsh lesson about their new place of residence. If you're waiting for something interesting to happen in Oklahoma, all you have to do is watch the skies. While any given day is likely to be calm and temperate, it doesn't take long for things to turn ugly. The state is home to some of the most threatening weather events on the planet. Towering thunderclouds with blistering lightning, flooding rain, and golf ball-sized hail are common fixtures in the region. In the early 20th century, the state's growing population only exacerbated the extreme conditions. Decades of poor farming practices contributed to the infamous Dust Bowl, during which billowing clouds of sediment blocked out the sun and buried entire communities alive. The storms raged for almost 10 years, contributing to perhaps the most severe poverty and destitution to ever exist in America. The abysmal conditions in Oklahoma forced many residents to abandon their homesteads entirely, never to return. Those who remain would eventually get to know another force of nature that was even more frightening. From my personal experience, there's an unnerving feeling you get passing through the endless landscape of the Great Plains. It's a sensation that's hard to put into words. All I can guess is that there's some vestigial part of our mammal brain that doesn't like wide open spaces. Our deepest instincts compel us to seek shelter, or else some nightmarish predator will swoop down and take us away. In the plains, there's nowhere to hide. With no mountains or trees blocking the horizon, the sky is bigger out here. Over time, the people of Oklahoma have learned to fear it.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
In the world of meteorology, the Great Plains are known by another name, Tornado Alley, home to the most notorious phenomenon in all of weather. If you tried to describe a tornado to someone who hadn't heard of one, they might not believe it was real. The idea of a swirling vortex of terror that obliterates anything in its path is something you almost have to see to believe, but doing so is easier said than done. For most of history, tornadoes were scarcely witnessed and much less understood. Even as research into atmospheric processes improved, scientists still struggled to predict them with any degree of accuracy. This limitation was especially dangerous for the people of Oklahoma, a place that sees more tornadoes than anywhere else on the planet. It turns out that the Plains Indians had a good reason to be nomads, because any permanent structure in Tornado Alley runs the risk of being destroyed without a moment's notice. The region sits at the confluence of 3 continental air masses, the interaction of which results in extreme atmospheric instability. The warming months of spring create the ideal conditions for the formation of supercell thunderstorms, the breeding ground of tornadoes. It's quite the coincidence that Oklahoma has so many casinos, because living here is itself a perpetual gamble. It's an all too common story for residents to go to bed at night and wake up no longer having a town to live in. With the state seeing more than 50 tornadoes per year on average, all you can do is hope and pray that you don't cross paths with any of them. The odds are less in your favor the further you venture into the center of the state, within the region formerly known as the Unassigned Lands. Today, the area encompasses 2 of Oklahoma's biggest urban settlements, Oklahoma City, the state capital, and Norman, home to the state university and, ironically enough, the National Weather Service. However, about halfway between these 2 population centers lies another city, a town of about 50,000 that most of America has never heard of. Welcome to Moore, Oklahoma, otherwise known as the tornado capital of the world. Within days of its incorporation in 1893, the town was immediately struck by a powerful twister that killed 31 of its founding residents. It was subsequently struck again in 1937, 1951, 3 times in 1960, twice in 61, and again in 65, 73, 74, 75, and finally in 1991. That's 12 confirmed tornadoes in just a century of existence, for a target no greater than 25 square miles. However, the streak of misfortune didn't seem to scare away new residents, and Moore's population kept growing. Despite the remarkable number of tornadoes hitting the city, the modern townsfolk had yet to experience one that was truly catastrophic. For better or worse, not all twisters are created equal. For the longest time, their true power was a mystery to the scientific world. That was until the groundbreaking research of one man. His name was Ted Fujita, although most only know him by one letter. After decades of comprehensively studying tornado damage, Fujita devised a revolutionary scale to measure their intensity. About half of all confirmed tornadoes register as an F0, the weakest classification, with estimated wind speeds under 73 miles per hour. Moving up the scale, the F1 classification makes up an additional third of recorded cases. At an F2 rating, things start to get dangerous, as wind speeds are now fast enough to destroy vehicles and mobile homes. An F3 will leave any man-made structure severely damaged, with winds potentially reaching 200 miles per hour. Beyond this point, tornadoes begin to pose an extraordinary threat to human life. At F4 intensity, tried and true notions of shelter begin to break down. Houses are completely ripped apart, and vehicles are lifted into the sky. Taking cover in an interior closet or underground bunker starts to become necessary for survival. The odds of any given tornado reaching F4 strength is about 1 in 100, making them relatively uncommon. However, in tornado-prone regions, an F4 may be expected to come around once in a generation. What's truly rare is the highest and most dangerous rating on the Fujita scale, the elusive F5. Across the worldwide history of recorded weather, fewer than 70 have ever been officially documented, and aside from a few exceptions, the F5 phenomenon is almost exclusively limited to the southeastern and midwestern United States. For whatever reason, the forces of nature have reserved their full fury for the heart of America. It is here where you can capture a glimpse of the most powerful winds on Earth. If a town is misfortunate enough to fall within the path of one of these things, the results can be difficult to fathom. Destruction doesn't even begin to describe it. In some cases, it can be hard to tell that anything was ever there. By the 1990s, the city of Moore had yet to be struck by anything worse than an F3. In this regard, you could have actually called it lucky. But in this part of the country, luck can change like the weather. An F5 tornado is approximately a 1 in 1,000 fluke, but that's still not as rare as a white bison. The albinism mutation, observed across the animal kingdom, is exceedingly peculiar among the American bison. Historically, the chance of a spontaneous albino bison birth is estimated to be 1 in 10 million. Due to their extreme rarity, many indigenous tribes in the Great Plains believe the white bison to hold tremendous spiritual significance. The Lakota people consider its arrival to signal a powerful omen of change. One of the first documented sightings of the creature was in 1933, right around the beginning of the Dust Bowl. The next true albino wouldn't resurface until May 9, 1996, when a white calf named Medicine Wheel was born on the Lakota reservation. It had arrived the very same day as the blockbuster film Twister, whose story depicts an F5 tornado tearing through Oklahoma. The movie premiered at the Penn Square Mall, just 13 miles north of Moore. Maybe this is all just a bunch of meaningless superstition, but it makes what happens next just a bit less tough to swallow. At the end of 1998, the city of Moore would be visited by another F2, its 13th tornado of the past century. When something keeps happening far more than it probably should, we may intuitively expect it to cool off in the future. However, this way of thinking is a fallacy. For independent events like the weather, the odds don't care about what's already transpired. If something can happen, there's nothing stopping it from happening again. This harsh truth of the cosmos runs contrary to our limited human purview of fairness. What's about to happen to Moore, Oklahoma is going to seem preposterously unfair, but just remember, there's nothing rigged about the forces of nature. The sun may not always shine, but the weather's always fair. The early hours of May 3, 1999 started like any other, with only a slight chance of thunderstorms expected later in the day. However, when forecasters retrieved that morning's weather balloon data, what they found was alarming. When predicting severe weather, meteorologists rely on measurements of atmospheric instability, which they quantify using what's known as a CAPE value. Typically, a value above 800 is sufficient for thunderstorm development. That morning, central Oklahoma produced a value over 4,000. By the afternoon, it had risen to nearly 6,000. Before long, it was clear to forecasters that all hell was about to break loose. Over the next 12 hours, 73 confirmed tornadoes will strike the plains, but this fateful day would be remembered for just one. At 6:23 p.m., a funnel cloud touches down just outside the small town of Amber, Oklahoma. Over the next few minutes, it expands at an incredible rate before reaching the nearby town of Bridge Creek. By this point, the funnel has swelled to a mile in diameter. At the height of its power, a mobile radar unit measures the wind speeds at the center of the vortex. The results are almost beyond comprehension. The radar clocked a velocity of 301 miles per hour, the highest wind speed ever recorded on Earth. A tornado so powerful that it was almost off the charts. Officially, the Fujita scale only goes up to 318 miles per hour. Since the radar measurement had a 20 mile per hour margin of error, there's a small chance, but a chance nonetheless, that this tornado broke the limit and crossed over into the forbidden category of F6. Fujita himself had theorized such a storm, one he described as inconceivable. Ultimately, he would never get to witness the greatest challenge to his system, passing away just 6 months earlier. It seems that as soon as Fujita left our world, his greatest nightmare was dragged into it. So, the strongest tornado in history has just appeared. Where could it be headed? The opening scene of Twister features an interesting bit of trivia. The footage on the family television is, in fact, a real newscast of tornado coverage in Oklahoma. The man on the screen is Gary England, chief meteorologist at KWTV, the station located at the heart of the most hazardous climate in the country. Starting in the 70s, he would revolutionize the way weather was presented on television, using never-before-seen techniques to produce the most advanced weather broadcasts in the world. There is no doubt that England's ardent dedication to his craft contributed to countless lives being saved. Now, after 27 years of service, he's arrived at his toughest day on the job. As the mile-wide behemoth approaches the Moore city limits, he knows he can't save everyone. 10 miles south in Norman, the National Weather Service has been firing off urgent weather bulletins all afternoon. But at 6:57 p.m., they broadcast something that was previously unheard of.
This is a tornado emergency for Moore and southern portions of Oklahoma City. We're tracking a large, extremely dangerous tornado 4 miles west of Moore, moving northeast at 20 miles an hour.
The typical procedure in situations like these was to issue a tornado warning, but this was no typical situation. The F5 bearing down on Moore had instigated the world's first tornado emergency. The circumstances were so dire that existing terminology could no longer convey it, so they had to invent one.
This storm is moving into West Moore as we speak. You should have already taken your tornado precautions in the Moore area. Let me tell you folks, this is deadly, deadly serious. Take your tornado precautions. Do it now.
The live coverage of this moment is truly some of the most harrowing footage in existence. Few other broadcasts have ever conveyed such profound feelings of doom and hopelessness.
And what you're looking at is a gigantic damage path from Ranger 9 from this tornado that's moving into the metro area.
The Channel 9 newscopter provides a bird's-eye view of the calamity. The tornado is obscured by rain and shadow. You don't really get to see it, but you do get to see where it is. Exploding electrical transformers mark the confines of the destruction. What you're watching is ordinary people like you and I losing everything. Homes, vehicles, precious keepsakes, all converted to rubble in seconds. With each passing moment, lives are being lost, families are being torn apart, and a community is being stripped of its very soul. The picture may not explicitly show it, but it's all in there, somewhere.
Mike, there you can see it on the ground. Very dangerous situation. Our worst fears really are realized. A major tornado on the ground in a major metropolitan area.
On the opposite side of the storm, the Channel 4 chopper provides an even closer view. The scenes are apocalyptic, something straight out of a kaiju film. The scale of it completely dwarfs our puny frame of reference. On the ground, storm chasers capture a far more visceral angle. While staring at the footage, meteorologist Mike Morgan is momentarily left speechless. He has never seen anything like this.
Your radio, forget the live pictures, go get safe. Oh my gosh. Folks, we plead with you, just go to your safe spot.
The thing just kept going. You don't really get a sense of how far it went just by looking at the map. To truly appreciate the scope of destruction, you have to retrace the path yourself. It takes a long time, much longer than you imagine it would. The farther you go, the more eerie it gets, knowing that everything you see would have been mangled beyond recognition.
On your FM dial on 104.1, 107.7, that is damage.
Mike,
okay.
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
Mike,
Yes,
you got to look at this. This is phenomenal. It's gone. The neighborhood is gone. It is gone, Mike. It's the whole neighborhood, Mike. The whole neighborhood is gone. There's nothing.
That is F5 tornado damage, 260-mile-an-hour winds plus.
After an hour and 25 minutes, the rampage came to a merciful end. The tornado ended up carving a 38-mile scar in the earth. The damage it left behind was otherworldly. Asphalt had been stripped from the roads. Trees had been completely debarked. A 36,000-pound rail car had been lifted more than 100 yards in the air. In total, more than 8,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, many of which were reduced to nothing more than a concrete slab. The storm had taken more than 40 lives and left 500 injured. Total damages were estimated in excess of $1 billion, the costliest for any tornado in history to that point. It took 2 months to clean up all the debris. The path of destruction remained visible for years afterward. Some say you can still see it today if you look hard enough. In the meantime, the city of Moore was gradually rebuilt and fortified with new safety precautions. The improvements would be put to the test in the May of 2003. The next tornado to return to Moore would be another violent one. Almost 4 years to the day of the tragedy, an F4 touched down right in the middle of the city. Despite taking a similar path to the F5, this twister would not record a single fatality. Overcoming such a dangerous threat provided a huge boost to the town's morale. It allowed many residents to finally put the events of 1999 behind them. Over the next few years, the world of meteorology would also move on from the F5 in a literal sense. The 1999 storm had provided so much data about wind damage that it made scientists reevaluate how tornadoes were classified. It turned out that tornado-force winds were actually more destructive than what was initially understood, and that Fujita's old system had to be recalibrated. Rather fittingly, the final act of the May 3rd twister was breaking the very scale that had tried to measure it. Starting in 2007, the Weather Service ushered in the enhanced Fujita scale. From that point on, the most powerful tornadoes would be designated as EF5, and with that, the terror of '99 had cemented its legacy as the last F5. In 2010, the city of Moore got its first taste of the new scale, as an EF4 grazed the southern outskirts of the town. As was the case in 2003, they had dodged another bullet, avoiding any fatalities within city limits. By now, the people of Moore had accepted recurring tornado encounters as an inevitability, but they could at least take solace in knowing that the worst was behind them. After all, a storm like the one in 1999 only comes around once in a lifetime. It seemed like that old omen about the white bison had finally run its course. Except, all the way back in 1996, there were actually 2 albino bison births. The first one died out not long after the F5 devastated Moore, but the second one kept on kicking. Its name was White Cloud, and in the spring of 2013, the clouds over Moore were brewing again. Starting on May 18th, Tornado Alley began to stir once more. Over the next 48 hours, more than 30 tornadoes touched down across the plains. The disturbance reached its highest instability around noon on May the 20th, with CAPE values approaching 5,000. 2 hours later, the skies over central Oklahoma had turned a shade of black not seen for quite some time. Just before 3 in the afternoon, a funnel cloud descends over the city of Newcastle and begins to head east. As the people of Moore gaze to the west, they are greeted with a familiar sight. The twister enters the city limits with 200-mile-per-hour winds. Doppler radar captures the image of a debris ball more than a mile wide. At the age of 73, Gary England can only watch in horror as he is once again powerless to stop the carnage. 3 months after this, he will walk away from the job for good, but not before one final visit from his lifelong nemesis. At the city's edge, the tornado engulfs the Celestial Acres Ranch. More than 100 horses are lifted into the sky before being cast back down to earth. A traffic jam is formed on nearby Santa Fe Avenue from panicked parents racing to get their children out of school. The gridlock only offers them a front row seat to the most terrifying sight of their lives. Briarwood Elementary suffers a direct hit. After a 12,000-gallon water tank caves in the roof, the entire structure disintegrates within the vortex. Moments later, nearby Plaza Towers Elementary is totally demolished as the eye of the storm passes overhead at full strength. By now, the thing no longer resembles a tornado as most would imagine it. It has mutated into a towering wall of darkness, wide enough to devour entire neighborhoods at once. The maelstrom strikes at the heart of the city, stacking cars on top of the Moore Medical Center. The hospital is spared from total collapse, but the surrounding homes are effectively wiped off the map. The twister would not let up until it sliced all the way through the rest of the city, only relenting after there was nothing left in its path. When the dust settled and the debris stopped falling, the sickening reality began to set in. After the damage was surveyed, the results were indisputable. The May 20th tornado entered the record books as an EF5. It happened again. I mean, what else can you really say at this point? This town had already suffered the ultimate indignity. The people had been brought to their very knees by the worst that nature had to offer. They had paid their dues, and it happened again. There is really nothing else like this. The only thing that comes close is the unincorporated community of Tanner, Alabama, which got hit by 3 F5s, including 2 on the same day. However, Tanner's tornado events were separated by almost 40 years. The city of Moore had just 14 years between their 2 F5s. In fact, since 2013, no other tornado has recorded an EF5 rating, meaning that as things stand, the last F5 and EF5 both happened to hit the same town. Out of everywhere they could have gone, it just had to be Moore. To this day, it's hard to say which one was worse. The 1999 storm had all the eye-popping numbers. It lasted longer, traveled farther, and had the fastest winds by a wide margin. But if you ask me, the 2013 storm was the more brutal of the bunch. It didn't pack the same destructive power, but what it did destroy cut far more deeply into the soul of the town. 2 elementary schools, the hospital, the movie theater, the local amusement park, not even the cemetery was safe. For the people who lived there, this force of nature might as well have been a force of evil. The trauma instilled by the events of May 20th would not be fully realized until 11 days later. On the 31st, the rattled and grief-stricken population of Moore see the western skies once again turn black. When tornado sirens start to go off, people begin to lose their minds. In the nearby city of El Reno, a funnel has grown to an unimaginable magnitude, spanning more than 2.5 miles in diameter. It's the biggest tornado ever recorded, and it's headed right for the Oklahoma City area. Foreseeing an unprecedented disaster, meteorologist Mike Morgan controversially urges his viewers to flee the area by driving south.
This is South Oklahoma City. You folks need to be, if you can go south right now, if you don't feel safe, go south.
The entire city is sent into a state of pandemonium. Over the next few minutes, thousands of residents abandon their homes and flood the streets. It's a scene of total chaos as drivers try to evacuate the storm by any means necessary. The sudden surge of vehicles brings traffic to a standstill. The highway has become a parking lot, trapping thousands as sitting ducks in the direct path of the vortex. What you're looking at is the purest expression of fear. Not the type of fear tied up with our modern sensibilities of pride or vanity. No, this fear is far more guttural, a sensation that predates man, something that can only be experienced after witnessing a level of wrath beyond our comprehension. This is fear rooted in desperation. The same desperation a fly endures once it's caught in a spider's web. It was desperation which first brought the Sooners to the unassigned lands. Now, more than a century later, they're just as desperate to escape. The people of Moore lived as their forefathers did, racing toward the horizon while trying to outrun fate. Moments before striking the interstate, the tornado dissipates and retreats back into the clouds. Had it continued ahead, as many as 500 lives could have been lost. The catastrophe may have been averted, but the tornado's true power had already been shown. While the city could be rebuilt time and time again, there was no repairing the people. This is what it looks like when human beings have learned to fear the sky itself. Today, when you visit Moore, it's hard to tell that anything happened at all. It's almost uncanny how ordinary it looks. A stranger passing through would have a hard time telling it apart from any other town in America. The difference, however, can be found in the people who call this place home. The locals here have this unmistakable humility. You get the sense that they're living off borrowed time. Only after experiencing such tremendous hardship can you truly appreciate what everyone else takes for granted. It requires a great deal of wisdom to savor the uneventful. The most impactful part of a tornado is the moment it's taken us the furthest from normality, when survivors first emerge from the rubble to gaze upon the alien wasteland around them. For a brief moment, man is transported to the world as it existed for eons, and we get a rare opportunity to witness ourselves at our most fundamental state. The worst damage Ted Fujita ever studied was not in Oklahoma or Texas or Alabama. It was in Nagasaki, after the detonation of the atomic bomb. When it happened, Fujita was living as a student 80 miles away in Kokura, the original target for Fat Man. On the day of the bombing, the city was obscured by clouds, forcing the mission to divert its focus to the secondary target. Fujita was quite literally spared by the weather. He would dedicate the rest of his life to studying it. However, his very first research assignment was no act of God. It had been the only time in history that tornado force winds were harnessed as an act of war. For centuries, philosophers have attempted to answer the question of whether human beings are inherently cruel. It's a term often ascribed to powerful deities, forces of nature, or the whims of fate itself. However, the capacity to act with cruelty is a uniquely human attribute. Nothing else in the natural world is capable of governing their decisions through hatred. This behavior is endemic to man. The question is whether we're destined to be like this. The past 10,000 years of non-stop warfare, conquest, and torture certainly do us no favors in this regard. In fact, the number of people who have perished from man-made conflict far outweighs those killed by tornadoes or any other natural disaster. The vices of modern man are difficult to overcome. However, it is through crisis which we are offered a rare opportunity at redemption. In the aftermath of the most powerful tornadoes, the brightest aspects of humanity often shine through. Amidst the ruins, there is no longer a material world to divide us. In this moment of immense scarcity, human life has been made precious. All of a sudden, animosities fade away, grudges are forgiven. People leave their ordinary lives behind and become heroes. Before long, however, the outside world intervenes. Everyone gets snapped back to reality where they begin the slow and steady march back to business as usual. The journey through Wonderland was only temporary, as is the nature of all tornadoes. These things that so profoundly alter the destiny of everything they touch only exist for a matter of minutes. In time, the memories will fade. Some may look back on it as nothing more than a bad dream. But for as long as they live, the feeling of that moment never really goes away. For in the center of a shattered world, wrapped up in all of our greatest fears, they had found harmony. Somewhere on the southwestern outskirts of Moore, there is a place where the two F5s crossed paths. There must have undoubtedly been some poor bastard living out here who was forced to rebuild their home from scratch, and 14 years later had to do it all over again. The blues musician Robert Johnson once wrote a song about a place like this, where he travels to the crossroads and sells his soul to the devil. The true crossroads are believed to be somewhere in western Mississippi, about 400 miles away from the heart of Oklahoma. While these two states are separated by distance, they remain connected through an integral link in their history. Mississippi was the original home of the Choctaw Nation, the very first of the displaced tribes to make the journey to Oklahoma. Strangely enough, Mississippi has also been stricken with some of the most violent tornadoes in the nation. Just a few years after visiting the crossroads, Robert Johnson dropped dead at the age of 27, as the devil collected his end of the bargain. The idea of the crossroads actually goes back thousands of years in folklore, appearing in cultures from all around the world. It is believed to be a gateway to the supernatural, a place where vengeful deities demand a powerful sacrifice. Maybe all this time, the city of Moore has just been at the center of one great divine punishment. To absolve the nation of its sins, one ill-fated town must be swallowed by the sky and witness the gates of hell. While retracing this whole story, I finally understood why people look towards a higher power in times of crisis. It just makes everything so much easier to explain. What continues to defy explanation, however, is why people still choose to live here. After all the tragedy, all the wrath, and all the bad blood that continues to haunt this place, the population of Moore just keeps on growing. Maybe it's ignorance, people who don't know the story that fall for the siren song of cheap prices and God-fearing neighbors. Or maybe it's the opposite, thrill seekers who are specifically drawn to danger and spectacle. Maybe some folks just enjoy rolling the dice, seeing how long they can gamble before getting cleaned out. Maybe others are searching for some elusive feeling that they can't quite find anywhere else. In spite of everything that's happened, the people of Moore have made it clear that they won't be going away anytime soon. What can I say? When you found some place that feels like home, it's hard to leave.